Imagine a cold autumn evening in 1823, deep in the rolling hills of Pennsylvania. The air hangs heavy with the scent of damp earth and fading leaves. At St. Augustine's Seminary, a secluded haven for young men destined for the priesthood, the world feels isolated from the bustle of nearby towns. Towering stone walls encircle the grounds, and a single bell tower rises like a sentinel against the darkening sky. As night falls, the bells toll their evening call, a rhythmic chime that echoes through the dormitories, summoning the students to prayer. But on this night, something shifts. The bells ring out as usual at first, deep, resonant peals that vibrate through the wooden floors. Then midway through they falter, a discordant clang, as if the ropes have tangled or the clapper has cracked. The sound warps into something unnatural, like a groan from the earth itself. Inside the halls, whispers turn to murmurs. The students, all young men in their late teens and early 20s, pause in their studies. Candlelight flickers on their pale faces, casting long shadows that dance like uneasy spirits. One by one, they exchange glances, a prickling unease crawling up their spines. Then come the screams, not the cries of pain at first, but sharp, guttural outbursts that rip through the silence. They start in the East Wing, where the newest arrivals bunk, and spread like wildfire. Footsteps thunder down the corridors, frantic, uneven. Doors slam open and shut. Voices overlap in a cacophony. Pleas for help, incoherent rants, accusations hurled at invisible foes. "It's here," one shouts. The eyes on the walls. Another laughs maniacally, the sound twisting into sobs. The seminary's rector, Father Elias Hawthorne, a stern man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetual frown, bolts from his quarters. He grabs a lantern, its flames sputtering in the drafty halls. As he rushes toward the noise, the screams intensify, punctuated by thuds, bodies hitting floors, furniture overturning. Glass shatters somewhere in the distance. The air grows thick, almost suffocating, laced with an acrid smell like sulfur or burnt hair. Hawthorne calls out, his voice steady at first. "Brothers, calm yourselves. This is hysteria." But his words dissolve into the chaos. He reaches the common room and freezes. Shadows flit across the walls, shapes that don't match the candlelight. Whispers slither through the air, too low to decipher, like secrets being traded in the dark. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence descends, not a peaceful quiet, but a void that presses in, heavy and absolute. The bells have stopped entirely. No echo, no distant ring. Outside, the wind howls, rattling the windows, but inside, it's as if the building has swallowed all sound. Hawthorne stands there, heart pounding, lantern trembling in his grip. He ventures further, pushing open doors to dormitories. Beds are empty, sheets tangled and bloodstained. In one room, a student lies slumped against the wall, eyes wide and glassy, throat marked with bruises that look self-inflicted. Another hangs from a rafter, belt looped around his neck. The rector's breath catches. He counts the horrors as he moves. 15 bodies in all, scattered like discarded puppets. Some with faces contorted in terror, others serene, as if asleep but for the unnatural pallor. By dawn, word reaches the nearby village. Farmers and townsfolk arrive on horseback, lanterns bobbing in the gray light. They find Hawthorne muttering prayers over the dead, his face ashen. The bodies are laid out in the chapel, covered in white cloths that do little to hide the stains seeping through. Whispers spread like mist. Poison? A plague? Or something darker? Something that defies the light of day? The air in the seminary feels charged, as if the walls themselves remember the screams. Rumors ignite overnight, tales of curses, of shadows that moved on their own. No one dares stay after dusk. And as the sun rises, casting long fingers over the bloodied halls, one question lingers. What force could silence the bells and claim 15 souls in a single night? To grasp the terror that unfolded that evening, we must delve into the roots of St. Augustine's Seminary itself, a place built on ground that seemed to harbor its own malevolent pulse long before the first stone was laid. Founded in 1815 by Bishop Theodore Langford, a visionary cleric fresh from European seminaries, The institution was meant to be a beacon of faith in the young American Republic. Langford, with his flowing robes and fervent sermons, envisioned a sanctuary where devout young men could study theology away from the temptations of growing cities like Philadelphia. He chose a sprawling tract of land in rural Pennsylvania, donated by a wealthy patron whose family had ties to the old colonial elite. The soil was fertile, the view serene, dense forests encircling meadows dotted with wildflowers. Construction began swiftly. Masons hauled gray stone from nearby quarries. Carpenters felled ancient oaks for beams. By 1817, the seminary stood complete, a Gothic edifice with arched windows as center chapel, and that looming bell tower, its spire piercing, in the sky like a divine arrow. But from the outset, unease shadowed the project. The land wasn't virgin. It carried whispers of older sorrows. Local Lenape tribes, displaced decades earlier, spoke of the area as the hollow ground, a place where spirits lingered after untimely deaths. Colonial records hinted at forgotten tragedies. A settler family vanished in the 1750s, their cabin found empty, save for claw marks on the doors. In 1792, a traveling preacher camped there and was discovered raving about eyes in the trees, his body covered in scratches. When Langford's workers broke ground, they unearthed odd relics, bone fragments, rusted iron tools etched with unfamiliar symbols. Some swore they heard faint echoes during digs, like distant cries muffled by earth. The bishop dismissed it as superstition, but the laborers, mostly Irish immigrants, crossed themselves and muttered prayers. One night, a foreman fell into a freshly dug foundation pit, breaking his neck. Witnesses claimed he was pushed by an unseen hand. As the seminary opened its doors, the locals kept their distance. Farmers from the village of Eldridge, just 5 miles away, avoided the property after sunset. They'd share stories over tankards at the inn, how the forest around the seminary seemed thicker, darker than elsewhere, swallowing light. Birds rarely sang there. Animals steered clear. Even the patron who donated the land, Elias Crow, a reclusive merchant with a shadowed past, died mysteriously shortly after the dedication, found in his bed with a look of horror frozen on his face. His widow whispered that he'd regretted the gift, claiming nightmares of buried secrets rising up. The church hushed such talk, attributing it to grief or envy. Yet as students arrived, carrying trunks filled with Bibles and ambitions, a subtle rot seemed embedded in the foundation. The air in the cellars carried a musty chill, even in summer. Doors creaked open on windless nights, and in the quiet hours, some swore they heard scratching beneath the floors, as if something long interred was stirring. These undercurrents simmered quietly at first, but as the years ticked by, they began to surface in subtle, insidious ways. By 1820, the seminary housed over 50 students, their days regimented with lectures on scripture, Latin drills, and silent meditations. Father Hawthorne, now rector, enforced discipline with a firm hand, believing rigor forged true faith. Yet, reports trickled in of peculiarities. It started small. A student named Samuel Reed, a bright lad from Boston, began sleepwalking. Night after night, he'd wander the halls in his nightshirt, eyes open but unseeing, murmuring in a tongue no one recognized, not Latin, not English, but something guttural and ancient. When shaken awake, he'd recall nothing, only a vague sense of being watched. Others followed suit. By mid-1821, fevered writings appeared in journals, scrawled entries about dreams where shadows whispered names of the dead. The nights grew restless. Screams pierced the darkness, not from pain, but from terror. One boy, Thomas Hale, bolted upright in bed, clawing at his chest as if insects burrowed beneath the skin. He babbled about the rotten core under the seminary, a void pulling at his soul. Physicians from Eldridge were summoned. They diagnosed laudanum overdoses or bad air from the swamps. But the symptoms escalated. Students reported visions in the chapel, faces peering from stained glass windows that weren't part of the design. Paranoia set in, whispers that fellow seminarians were imposters, their eyes too dark, their smiles too sharp. Attempts to flee multiplied. In 1822, 3 boys packed their belongings and slipped out at dawn, only to be found miles away, disoriented and muttering about paths that looped back on themselves. 2 more vanished entirely. No trace, no letters home. Their empty beds became taboos. No one spoke of them, as if naming the lost invited the same fate. The staff noticed, of course. Hawthorne confided in letters to the bishop about a malaise upon the house, but he attributed it to youthful frailty or demonic temptation. Tests of faith. He increased prayers and forced fasts, but the strangeness deepened. A groundskeeper found carvings on trees encircling the property, symbols matching those unearthed during construction. Rain refused to wash them away, as winter blanketed the grounds in snow. The isolation amplified every creak, every sigh of wind. Students huddled by fires, sharing hushed tales that blurred legend with reality. The seminary, once a refuge, now felt like a trap, its walls closing in. And amid this growing dread, a core group emerged. 15 young men whose afflictions burned brightest, drawing them together in a web of shared madness. These 15, drawn from diverse corners, farm boys from the Midwest, scholars from New England, formed an unwitting brotherhood bound by their unraveling minds. They weren't chosen by design. Fate, or something darker, selected them. It began with subtle bonds, late-night conversations in the library, where they'd pore over forbidden texts smuggled in. Journals from this period, later seized and partially burned, reveal the descent. Elijah Morrow, the eldest at 22, wrote of recurring dreams, a figure in black robes beckoning from the bell tower, promising revelations if he'd only climb. His entries grew erratic, ink smudged with what looked like tears or blood. The ground hungers, he scrawled. It remembers what we buried. Paranoia wove through their interactions. Young Peter Klein accused his roommate of stealing thoughts, claiming he heard echoes in his head. Sudden violence erupted. Fistfights over imagined slights. One boy slashing his own arms to let the whispers out. Visions unified them. All 15 reported seeing spectral forms in mirrors, faces decayed and pleading. They gathered in secret, away from staff eyes, in the damp cellar where the air tasted metallic. There they'd share letters home, unsent pleas for escape. Mother, the shadows here have teeth, one penned. Staff observed the changes. Pale complexions, hollow eyes. But silence prevailed. Hawthorne feared scandal. The church couldn't afford whispers of instability. A tutor, Brother Anselm, confided in a diary that he overheard their murmurs. Talk of the old ones beneath the land, entities disturbed by the seminary's foundations. As months blurred, the 15 isolated further. They ate little, slept less, their bodies wasting while their minds fractured. Conversations turned prophetic. Predictions of a reckoning, a night when the bells would fail. One Isaac Vaughan painted crude symbols on his walls with charcoal, claiming they warded off the encroaching dark. When confronted, he laughed, a sound like cracking ice. Families received vague updates. Your son progresses in faith. But the truth festered. The group began rituals of their own, chanting in the woods at midnight, carving sigils into tree bark. Witnesses from afar saw flickering lights, heard low moans carried on the wind. The seminary's atmosphere thickened, charged with anticipation. No one outside the 15 fully grasped the depth, but the staff's quiet complicity allowed the spiral to tighten. And as autumn 1823 approached, the signs pointed to an inevitable shatter. A night when the fragile veil between sanity and abyss would tear wide open. That fateful night unfolded like a storm long brewing, its fury unleashed in waves that drowned reason. October 4th dawned crisp, but by evening, a fog rolled in from the forests, cloaking the seminary in milky haze. The 15 had grown reclusive, skipping meals and vespers. Hawthorne noted their absence, but dismissed it as fervent study. As dusk fell, the bells began their toll, 7 peals for the hour. But on the 4th, a hitch. The rope slipped in the ringer's hands, or so he claimed later. The chime warped, echoing strangely, as if muffled by unseen hands. In the dormitories, the 15 stirred. Elijah Morrow, in his room, clutched his journal, scribbling furiously. It comes. The silence calls. Sounds erupted piecemeal. A door creaked in the east wing, Footsteps padding softly at first, then accelerating. Peter Klein's voice rose in a wail. They're inside, crawling through the veins. Glass shattered, a window pane, perhaps hurled in frenzy. The other students, the unafflicted, barricaded their doors, hearts racing. But the 15 roamed free, drawn by an invisible thread. Witness accounts, pieced from survivors, paint a mosaic of horror. Shadows lengthening unnaturally in candlelight, walls seeming to breathe. In the common room, Isaac Vaughn stood trance-like, carving into his palm with a quill nib, blood dripping in patterns on the floor. "The old ones rise," he murmured, eyes rolled back. Violence cascaded. Thuds of bodies colliding, fights among the 15 or against phantoms. One burst into the chapel, overturning pews, screaming accusations at the crucifix. "You build on our bones." The air grew foul, sulphurous, as if the earth belched secrets. Abandoned rooms told tales. Bedsheets torn, mirrors smashed to avoid reflections that twisted into monstrosities. Hawthorne, lantern in hand, navigated the chaos, calling names into the void. He found Morrow atop the bell tower stairs. Neck snapped from a fall or a push. Klein lay in a hallway, throat bruised purple, fingers clenched as if strangling himself. The screams peaked in a chorus, then ebbed to whimpers. By midnight, silence reigned, broken only by distant owl calls. The 15 lay scattered, some in contorted poses, limbs akimbo, others peaceful, as if slumbering after exhaustion. Physical clues puzzled. No weapons, no poison evident. Yet bruises bloomed like fingerprints from giant hands. Rooms held odd remnants, sigils drawn in blood, scraps of paper with frantic pleas. Forgive the disturbance. Everyone agreed. Something unnatural prowled those halls, a presence that silenced bells and souls alike. But what it was, no mortal tongue could name. In the grim light of morning, the aftermath descended like a shroud over St. Augustine's. Villagers arrived, faces etched with dread, to cart away the bodies. The air still hummed with residual terror, as if the seminary exhaled its final poisoned breath. Authorities, local constables, and church envoys swarmed the grounds. Bishop Langford, aged and frail, traveled from Philadelphia, his carriage rattling over rutted roads. He declared it a tragedy of illness, perhaps tainted water or a fever from the swamps. But autopsies, conducted hastily in Eldridge's makeshift morgue, revealed no disease, only internal ruptures, as if hearts burst from fright. Hysteria became the next scapegoat, mass delusion among impressionable youths. The church leaned hard on this, sermons preaching against unchecked imagination. Families, grief-stricken, arrived in waves, mothers weeping, fathers demanding answers. They were met with sealed lips and compensations. Hush money disguised as charitable aid. "Speak not of this, lest you invite scandal upon the faith," Hawthorne urged. Evidence vanished. Journals burned in the seminary's furnace. Carvings sanded from walls. The bell tower was inspected, ropes intact, yet the clapperboard dents like claw marks. Locals, however, whispered defiance. Old-timers at the unspun yarns of curses awakened, of the land's ancient grudge. "Never human," they'd say, eyes darting. Something older, angrier. The seminary shuddered within weeks. Students dispersed to other institutions with warnings to forget. The property stood empty, gates chained, as vines crept over stones. Church records buried the incident in archives, labeling it the unfortunate episode. Yet echoes lingered. A groundskeeper sworn he saw lights in windows months later. Families of the 15 carried scars, descendants plagued by nightmares, some taking their own lives in patterns too similar to ignore. The cover upheld, but cracks formed, truths seeping like groundwater. Even now, 2 centuries on, the shadow of St. Augustine's clings to that Pennsylvania hollow. The land, overgrown and forgotten, draws the curious, urban explorers with cameras, historians chasing ghosts. Reports trickle in, hikers lost in fog that rises unnaturally, paths twisting back to the ruins. One group in 2018 claimed to hear bells tolling at dusk, though no tower stands. Descendants of the 15 speak in hushed forums online, sharing inherited journals with faded warnings. Disturb not the soil. Some insist the seminary wasn't razed, but concealed, bricked over perhaps, or swallowed by earth in a deliberate sinkhole. Strange phenomena persist. Animals avoid the sight, electronics fail, and at night, whispers ride the wind. Investigators with EMF meters detect spikes. Voices captured on recordings pleading, "Why did you build?" The church denies access. Fences reinforced. But locals know. The rotten core endures, waiting for the next disturbance. And so we ask in the quiet of our own safe homes, what if the bells stop ringing tonight? What secrets might rise to claim us all?